So Dhul Hijjah is the last month, the 12th month in the Islamic lunar calendar. And it has been announced this morning that it is going to be starting tonight, meaning it already started because the day in the Islamic calendar starts at sunset. So sunset was just a little while ago after Maghrib prayer. So the new month of Dhul Hijjah has started. So we're in a new month now. And the month of Dhul Hijjah, Dhu means possessor of. Hijjah from the word Hajj. So literally the name of the month is the month of Hajj or the time of Hajj. So Hajj is something very important. It's one of the pillars of Islam. Every Muslim is supposed to perform Hajj at least once in their lifetime. But it is also special for people who are not going for Hajj every single year. So now that the month has begun and we're in the month of Hajj or the month of Dhul Hijjah, the first 10 days of this month are extra special because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created space and He created time. And He made some spaces and some places better than others. Like Mecca, like Medina, like Jerusalem. Allah chose these places to be better and more rewarding when you pray there than other places in the world. Likewise, Allah created time. And Allah chose certain times to be more rewarding and you get multiplied good deeds when you actually do good deeds during those times. And actually what that does is it encourages people to do more. It encourages people to try their best to do as many extra credit deeds that they can possibly do. So among the times that Allah chose where we do good deeds, our good deeds get multiplied, was the month of Ramadan. And what month is Ramadan in the Islamic lunar calendar? Anybody? Did she say 9? And you just said on her behalf? It is the 9th, yes. So the 9th month. What about the month of Dhul Hijjah? What month is that in the Islamic lunar calendar? It's the 12th, right? So I think most Muslims in the world, they understand that Ramadan is special. But for some reason, many don't recognize that the first 9 days, 10 days, but 10th day is Eid. The first 9 days of Dhul Hijjah are just like Hajj. Like there's so much reward when you do good during that time. But for some reason, people miss out on this for whatever reason it is. Maybe because it's not specifically mentioned in the Quran, it's mentioned in Hadith, so it kind of misses them for some reason. So the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said in an authentic Hadith, he said, "Mal amalu fi ayyam al-ashri afdala min al-amali fi hadhihi." He said there are no days in the year where actions are more rewarded than in these 10 days. And the 10 days that he's referring to are the 10 days, the first 10 days of the month of Dhul Hijjah, which is where we're in right now. Today, meaning tonight, started the first day of Dhul Hijjah. So what should you do? You should increase your good deeds. Try to do as many good deeds as possible. You should try to be fasting during these days, as many days as you can. It's slightly recommended to fast. On the 9th day of Dhul Hijjah, the day of Arafah, it's highly recommended to fast. But even in these first 8 days, recommended to fast, recommended to pray more, recommended to pray in the masjid, recommended to read more Quran, recommended to reflect on the meaning of the Quran, recommended to give more charity, visit people who are sick, be extra careful, don't gossip, be extra careful, don't use foul language, be extra careful, don't insult other people. All just like Ramadan. You increase in your good deeds and you be extra careful of doing any bad deeds. We're in the exact same time right now. So, this is Dhul Hijjah. Now today we're going to focus a little bit on the aspect of the sacrifice. So, animal sacrifice, sacrificing an animal for Allah is what's known as Udhiyah or Qurbani. And it is something that is going to be done in this month of Dhul Hijjah, and it's going to be done right after the day of Eid. So Eid is on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, and this sacrifice is going to be right afterwards, either on that day or the following day or the following day. So let's talk about why is there even this concept of sacrificing an animal once a year? Like what's the purpose behind it? Why does it happen? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned about the story of Prophet Ibrahim in Surah Al-Safat, chapter 37, verse 100. Ibrahim made a dua to Allah. He said, Rabbi habli min as-salihin. O Allah, grant me a child who will be a righteous child, who will be among the righteous. A very important lesson here. When you're asking for children, or you have children already, and you're thinking about what kind of college you want them to go to, you think about what kind of career they should go into, you think about how much money you want them to make, who what kind of things that define success for them in life. Prophet Ibrahim set the standard. What's the one most important thing he's asking for? I want my child to be min as-salihin. I want my child to be among the righteous. Because you can have all the money in the world, you can have all the degrees in the world, you can have all the publicity and millions of likes for every single video or funny picture meme that you post, and you feel like you're an online celebrity. None of that matters if you're not among the salihin. So this is a very important reminder that Prophet Ibrahim taught us the most important thing to ask for our children, and of course for ourselves, is that we want to be among the salihin, among the righteous. So then Allah says in the next verse, verse 101, فَبَشَّرْنَاهُ بِغُلَامٍ حَلِيمٍ. We gave him the good news that he's going to have a patient child. So what did Ibrahim ask for? A righteous child. Righteousness has many different aspects to it. You could be generous, you could be praying a lot, you could be somebody who is giving lots of charity, very generous. You could be someone who's always helping others. And Allah described one specific quality of the son of Ibrahim that he's going to have. It's going to be halim. It's going to be patient. That's just one of the characteristics of being among the salihin, being patient. But why did he emphasize that quality? Because Allah is going to test both of them, and especially this child, with a test that's going to require him to manifest and exercise his patience, and it's not going to be an easy test. فَلَمَّا بَلَغَ مَعَهُ السَّعْيَ قَالَ يَا بُنَيَّ إِنِّي أَرَى فِي الْمَنَامِ أَنِّي أَذْبَحُكَ. So once the child, Ibrahim had no children when he was making this dua. This was the first son that he had. What was the name of the first and eldest son of Prophet Ibrahim? Yes, Ismail. And in English, in the Bible, they call that Ishmael. Right? So Ismail. So it says once he reached the age of, basically the age of being an adult, he can make decisions. He's becoming beyond like being a little kid. He's turning into an adult. He can move around and he can go about his business and he can make independent decisions. Then he said, قَالَ يَا بُنَيَّ. Prophet Ibrahim said to him, "O my dear son, I have seen in a dream that I am supposed to sacrifice you." Dream from Allah. فَانظُرْ مَاذَا تَرَى. I want to know what you think. قَالَ يَا أَبَتِ افْعَلْ مَا تُؤْمَرُ. He said, "O my father, do as you have been commanded. سَتَجِدُنِي إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مِنَ الصَّابِرِينَ. You will find me, if Allah wills or if Allah allows, among the patient people." So meaning I am willing to be patient with this test because I trust in you and I trust in Allah. So then Ibrahim is going to undertake this act that Allah has told him to do. فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَا وَتَلَّهُ لِلْجَبِينِ. When both of them submitted, that's the word Islam, they both submitted themselves. Islam means to submit or to surrender. So when they both submitted themselves to the will of Allah, وَتَلَّهُ لِلْجَبِينِ, he laid him down and he was about to be sacrificed. He was about to be, he was going to be the child that is going to be sacrificed with a knife. وَنَادَيْنَاهُ أَن يَا إِبْرَاهِيمُ. We called out to him, "O Ibrahim." Basically like, you don't need to do it, stop now. قَدْ صَدَّقْتَ الرُّؤْيَا. You have fulfilled the vision. The vision that Ibrahim had, and he's a true prophet, so his visions are true. He said, you have completed the command that we gave you. إِنَّا كَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ. This is how we repay the people who do good. You're among the muhsinin. he's among the muhsin, he's among the good people. So we're not going to cause any sacrifice to happen. إن هذا لهو البلاء المبين. This was a clear test to see what you're going to do. And then here's the part of the sacrifice. This is where the sacrifice on the day of Eid comes in, right here. Verse number 107. وَفَدَيْنَاهُ بِذِبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ. And we ransomed him with a great sacrifice. So the word fadaynahu, from the word fidya, means to ransom in place of something, to sacrifice in place of something else. What did we do? We gave him another sacrifice instead. So there was an animal, and Allah said, just go ahead and sacrifice one of these animals instead, and that will be the way in which you show you've already passed your test, but that doesn't mean you do nothing. You still want to make sure that you're doing some sacrifice for the cause of Allah. So you do a sacrifice of this sheep or this ram that's there. وَتَرَكْنَا عَلَيْهِ فِي الْآخِرِينَ. And we left that as an example for generations that are going to be coming later on. This is exactly where this concept of a sacrifice comes from. So when we sacrifice an animal, we are reenacting what Prophet Ibrahim was doing and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ransomed Ismail with another sacrifice. So there's this concept of udhiyah or qurbani. How many of you grew up using the word qurbani for this sacrifice? Okay, if you're Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi, you probably use this word. How many of you grew up using the word udhiyah, right? So if you're Arab or East African, you use the word udhiyah. They mean the same thing. Okay, we're talking about the exact same thing. So there are some rules when it comes to udhiyah or when it comes to qurbani. Udhiyah from duha, from Eid al-Adha. Eid means festival. Adha means sacrifice. So this is a festival of sacrifice. Qurbani comes from the word qarib. So qurban, it means a way of drawing near to something. So you draw near to Allah by sacrificing something. So who needs to perform this sacrifice? This is where people get very confused. So Muslim scholars have differed over this issue. Sacrificing an animal is part of Islam. Where they differed was, do you have to do it or is recommended for you to do it? Where they differed is, does every individual adult have to do it or it's only one per family? And what happens is that Muslim scholars are split on this issue. So one view is that if you're an adult and if you can afford it, you must offer an animal sacrifice on the day of Eid or one of the 2 days afterwards. You have to do it. So basically, if you're paying zakah, a little bit lower threshold. If you have the amount of zakah that you're supposed to pay, 85 grams of gold or equivalent, let's say $6,000. And that includes the value of your personal items. If you got 2 TVs in your house and you got 2 sofas in your house, you don't need 2 TVs. In fact, you don't need any TVs. You could sell them and then you can subtract that from the amount of, you count that towards the amount of money that you have. All the excess things that you don't have, that you have, that are not absolute needs, you're going to count that into the value of about $6,000. If you have that much money or more, according to this opinion, which is the Hanafi school of thought, every single adult who owns this much money, and usually they're going to be paying zakah or a little bit lower threshold, they must perform an animal sacrifice on the day of Eid. It is a requirement. It's wajib. It must be done. And this also means that men who have the money must do it. Women who have the money must do it. Don't expect your husband to do it for you. If you're an adult child of a parent who has money and he says, you know what? I hope my dad does it for me. I hope my mom handles it for me. If you're an adult and you have this much money, you're supposed to handle it yourself because you're a financially responsible adult. This is one opinion. The second opinion is that it is highly recommended to do it. It is an emphasized sunnah to sacrifice an animal but it's not an absolute requirement that if you don't do it, you're going to be sinful. These are two opinions here. I believe, my personal view is that if you can afford to sacrifice an animal, you should. Why wouldn't you? This is a highly emphasized sunnah. You should not leave something like that. In terms of whether you should do one per family or one per individual, this one, I don't have a very strong view. Scholars have split on this. The Hanafi school says every individual must do it. The other schools say it's only one per family. Okay, so whichever one you're going to follow, that's going to be fine. When is the animal sacrifice supposed to be done? It can be done on the 10th day of Dhul Hijjah, which is what day? It's also known as the day of Eid, after the Eid prayer. It can be done on the 11th. If you got busy, you didn't have time. It can be done on the 12th, but it cannot be done afterwards. So it needs to be done within this time frame. Okay, and you have two options. You can either go locally somewhere and slaughter yourself an animal, or you can pay somebody to go and do it on your behalf. I'm going to get into some of these details in a little bit. What type of animals are you allowed to slaughter in Islam? You cannot just pick any animal. Say, you know what? I love chicken. I love going to Dave's Hot Chicken. You know what? So I'm just gonna grab a few chickens, slaughter them, Bismillah, and I'm gonna make some, what do they call them? Chicken hot tenders or something. I'll make some chicken biryani, and we're good to go. And I'm gonna serve it, and I'm gonna give it to some to the poor. And no, you can't do that. You can only pick certain types of animals. You can't be like, you know what? I love fish, man. I'm gonna make some fish stew. I'm gonna slaughter a fish. I can't even slaughter a fish anyways. So you can choose between a sheep, a goat, a cow, or a camel, right? Or variations of that. Like if you can find a buffalo or something like that. Probably not. But so you get four options: sheep, goat, camel, or cow. Now what happens is that if you do a sheep or a goat, this counts as one animal, one person. It's a smaller animal. If you do a cow or if you do a camel, these animals are large. They're much larger than a sheep. They're much larger than a goat. So what you can do is 7 people can gather together and purchase a larger animal like a camel or a cow. And when they sacrifice it, it counts for 7 people. So you could buy 1/7 of a cow or 1/7 of a camel, and everyone's going to share in that. So this is requirement number 1. Requirement number 2, you can't just pick any animal that you want. There are some other requirements. The age of the animal matters. So when it comes to a sheep, the sheep has to be a minimum of 6 months old or older. It cannot be a little baby sheep. Because you can get those for cheap. Someone comes along and says, I'm going to get a 5-month-old sheep. No, you can't do that. It must be old enough where it is an animal that has a certain type of value. Otherwise, you're trying to undercut. So it must be 6 months or older. A goat needs to be, does anybody know? How old must the goat be for you to sacrifice it? Raise your hand if you know. 2 years? Close. Yes. What did you say? 4 months? 4 years. Okay. Actually, going down the opposite. 1 year. Okay. So the goat has to be 1 year or older. What about a cow? How old does a cow have to be? Same answer. Same answer. 2 years. How old does the camel have to be? I know, we don't really know these things. We're like, how old is a camel? Do they live to 25, 42? We don't even know because we're not camels. It has to be 5-year-old camel, minimum, right? So these are much larger animals. So they all have their age requirement that was set by the Messenger of Allah and sometimes by ijtihad from the scholars. So this is the second requirement. Third requirement is you can't just go and pick an animal that's be like, oh, I'm going to get this sheep. They're like, how much is that sheep? Say, that sheep, that's $200 sheep. Say, I need something cheaper than that. Oh, you know what? There's this one, it got really sick. It had the flu, and the poor sheep, it's limping. It can barely walk. That one I can give you for $100. Trying to get a discount. It's like buying a used car, right? And one car, it's like, this car, it's got the engine light. It's on. It's got like half a wheel is missing. It's like broken from the back. See, that's the car that I want. We're giving this in the cause of Allah. So you have to have a minimum standard. You don't just buy garbage, right? There were two brothers. Tell me if you know the story. There were two brothers, and their father told them, I want each of you to sacrifice an animal for Allah. And one of them went and brought the best animal that he had, sacrificed it for Allah. The other brother, he brought this absolute garbage and said, you know what, this is the thing that I'm going to give for Allah. One of them, the sacrifice was accepted. The second one, the sacrifice was rejected. His father told him, Allah has not accepted your sacrifice. Does anybody know the name of the father in this story? What's the name of the father? Prophet Adam. Very good. Does anyone know the name of the two sons in this story? Yes. Cain and Abel. Does anyone know the Arabic names for Cain and Abel? Yes. Habil and Qabil. Very good. Which one was Habil? Abel or Cain? This is a Bible. You don't have to know this, but do you know? So just think of it this way. Habil and Qabil. Cain and Abel. Which one has the ka and the ka? The qa and the ka. Qabil, Cain. That's where it came from. Got it? All right. And what's the end of the story? When his sacrifice wasn't accepted, what did Qabil do? What did he end up doing? Huh? Someone's got to raise their hand. Yes. Yeah, go ahead. He killed his brother, Habil. Yes. Why? Because he was jealous and he blamed his brother instead. So, how did we get on this? Oh, yeah. Allah is not going to accept the sacrifice of bad animals. So, you have to meet the minimum requirement of age, and you have to make sure that these animals are not all messed up. So, it should not have a major defect. Now, some animals are going to have minor defects. If it got a little bit cut here, or it has like a little part of its horn got broken or something like that, that's fine. That's going to happen with a lot of animals. You don't have to find the perfect animal, but it cannot have a major defect. What is a major defect? If it's missing an eye, it's missing an ear, it's missing a tail, right? It's missing a few teeth. Teeth are fine. It's missing a teeth. So if it's missing any essential organ for the functioning of life, even one of them, considered to be a major defect. If it's missing something that is not part of a major function of its life, like let's say it's missing a few teeth, but it has most of its teeth, it can still eat just fine, that would be fine. It's missing part of its horn. Is having both of your horns intact an essential life function for that type of animal? It's not. So those are considered to be minor defects. You can go ahead and do that. So this is the requirements for an animal. What you cannot do, you cannot pick another animal that's not from this list of 4 animals and say, I'm going to pick a chicken or I'm going to pick some other animal, whatever it is. And what you also cannot do, and I hear people do this all the time. So you know what? I'm just going to go and I'm going to buy some meat. And I'm going to give that meat to the poor. So I'm going to go buy a bunch of pounds of meat from the meat store, bring it home, and I'm going to, give it out to people. This is about sacrificing an actual animal. It's not about just distributing meat to the poor. There's an aspect of distributing meat. There's an aspect of sacrificing an animal. The meat, anyways, an animal got sacrificed anyways. So it's not like animals don't get killed and don't get sacrificed for meat consumption anyways. So don't fall into that trap like some people do. Now, what do you do with the meat? I'll take questions at the end, inshallah. What do you do with the meat? So once you've sacrificed the animal, you have the option to do one of 3 things, or a mixture of all 3. You can give part of the animal in charity so that people who are not very well off, they usually don't get access to meat. And meat in many parts of the world is expensive. I know in America, some of the stuff in the fast food industry, it's like cheaper than water, We don't know how they do it. We don't know what's in there. But in many parts of the world, it's very expensive to get meat. And meat is considered to be a high quality food because it's not that, it's expensive. It takes a lot of time to process. It takes a lot of time for the animal to grow and sacrifice and clean and all of those other things. So part of the animal you give in charity. Part of it you feed to your friends. And part of it you're allowed to eat it yourself. Now technically, you could actually give all of it to charity and not keep any of it, and it still counts. Technically, you could eat all of it yourself, and it still counts because you sacrificed an animal. But it's good to have a little bit division of give some in charity, give some to your friends, invite them over, whatever it is, and keep some for yourself and keep using it in your own home as well. So you can do that. But what you cannot do is you cannot sell any part of this meat. So you can't go sacrifice the animal, say I'm doing this for Allah, and you bring the meat back, like, hey man, I know you like beef. You want to buy 50 pounds? You want to buy $50 worth of beef for me? I got like the good cuts. You cannot do that. Because if you did it for Allah, you can't sell it and then make the money back. Then there's a practice that some people were doing. Is that when you buy the animal and you get it sacrificed, you have to pay the butcher who's gonna, if you sacrifice the animal yourself, it needs to be cleaned. That's the most difficult part. Slaughtering the animal's the easy part. Having it skinned, having it cleaned, having it chopped up, having it packaged in boxes and everything, and then taking it and distributing it, that's a very time-consuming process. It's not a pretty process. For me, that's like seeing an animal skin is just not my thing. But anyways, that's difficult. So what some people do is they say, you know what? I'm going to compensate the guy for what he would have charged me. I'm going to give him part of the meat as compensation for his fee in order to clean up the animal and package it for me. Allowed or not allowed? Not allowed, because it's like selling the animal that you sacrificed for Allah and then you're going and you're selling it back. Okay? That's if you're going to slaughter it yourself. Now, most people in America, they're not going to slaughter themselves. So the question is, can somebody else do it for you? Can they do it on your behalf? If you find it difficult to go on Eid day or the day after Eid or whatever, to go and physically purchase an animal and then slaughter that animal, you're allowed to pay somebody else to do it on your behalf, do the sacrifice correctly, Islamically, and then you can distribute the meat yourself, or you can even have them distribute the meat for you to whomever you want. So you can go and find your own person if you want. So for example, can you, in Irvine, can you go and buy a goat, bring it to your home, you sacrifice in your backyard? Can you do that? Why not? It's not legal. It's not legal. I had a friend of mine. See, there's some cities which allow. You have to have a zoning for this. Some cities like Norco and Chino, this is where like the farms are. You don't have it over here. It's going to be very difficult to find any place in Irvine. I don't think there's any place in Irvine that you can find that will allow you to sacrifice an animal somewhere. In fact, you can't even put a home on Airbnb in Irvine. It's even banned. If you check, there's nothing in Irvine, right? So Irvine has a lot of restrictions. So if you wanted to do this, you'd have to go out to a city like San Bernardino or Norco or Chino, where they offer these services and they have these farms and they have these animals. I had a friend of mine, funny story. A friend of mine, he actually bought a goat on Craigslist, right? He literally, Corona, he lives in Corona. He literally bought a goat on Craigslist. He drove his van, his wife's van, took out all the seats, he literally put the goat in his van, brought it back to his house in Corona, and he kept the goat in the backyard. Now, this was technically not legal, right? So he almost got in trouble because Norco used to be part of Corona. It used to be called North Corona. So Norco, it's allowed. Corona, it's not allowed. So you have to make sure if you're doing some weird, shady stuff like this, make sure it's legal if you're going to do it. But now most people are not going to do something like this. Most people, they're going to go to a farm. And if you go to a farm, you can get someone to sell you an animal, and you can say, I'm going to slaughter the animal. You're going to say, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, slaughter the animal. Say, you pack it for me, and you skin it for me, and everything like that, and I'll go and collect it. So there are people in our community who can do one of two things for you. Either you can pre-order an animal, and you're going to go on the day of Eid, or the day after, and you're going to drive to the farm in Norco or in Cupertino or in San Bernardino or wherever other places it's allowed. And you're going to show up at the farm, and they're going to pick out the animal for you, whether it's a goat or a cow or whatever it is. And when you're ready, they're going to put the animal down on the floor. They're going to hand you a knife, and you're going to slaughter the animal. And I'm going to teach you how to slaughter the animal. So this is one option. Option number two is you never show up at the farm. You just give money to someone. They'll go do it locally at a farm for you. Option number three, which for a lot of people, this is the most convenient option, is you take out your credit card and you go on a website on your phone and you just type ICNA Relief USA and you go to the Qurbani Udhiyah donation page, or you go to Islamic Relief, or you go to Helping Hand, or you go to Life, or you go to Mercy Without Limits, or you go to Baytul Mal, or you go to all these organizations that can sacrifice an animal for you and get your Udhiyah or Qurbani done. Some of them are going to do it locally, and some of them are going to do it in some other part of the world. So I'm going to mention that in a moment. So you can go and you can pay for the price of the animal and the price of the slaughter and the price of the distribution, because people are putting work in. You have to pay someone for all this work, and it gets done for you. Is this valid? Does it count? Yes, it counts. So if you say, I can't go to a farm, it's difficult for me, I can't stand the sight of blood, whatever reason, you can go on one of these websites and you can order an animal and you can get the entire thing done, and it'll even be distributed for you. Some of them you can buy it and they'll have the meat dropped off to you, and then you do whatever you want with the meat. The other one, you will never see the meat or anything. It will literally be 30, 60 seconds. Take out your phone, go on the website, put your credit card information in, you get a receipt, and you're done. Now here's the pros and cons. The pro of this is it takes like a minute or two. Super quick, very easy. You fulfill the responsibility, inshallah you get the reward for it. The con of this is that it's so easy that you don't really get the feeling of really doing an act of worship. Like, yes, the money left your account. You paid the money for the animal. But you didn't get any feeling of, putting time, putting effort, having a connection with, this is the way things used to happen. You'd go to a farm, you'd sacrifice an animal, or at least look at your animal. At least have a picture of your animal. When I was a kid, one time we visited another country, and we got to play with our goat for like several days. You had this feeling, and then the goat is going to be slaughtered. I know we were kids, so we cried obviously because we got close to the goat. But there's this feeling that like you have this feeling of being connected with the process of sacrifice. Today, it's like we never even see animals. We just see a burger, or we see chicken, or we see meat, and we have no connection. So sometime in your life, I recommend that you try to reestablish at least some level of connection with the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made things, by visiting a farm, or at least seeing somebody, or at least watching somebody else sacrifice your animal that you paid, or something like that on your behalf, okay? Rather than every single year only just doing it through a website. This is my advice and my suggestion. The next question is, can I do it abroad? So does it have to be here in my own locality or in the United States of America? Or can I send this animal sacrifice, udhiyah, or this qurbani, in another country somewhere else? So the general rule is just like zakah. The general rule for zakah and the general rule for udhiyah is that it's supposed to be done in your own locality. You're supposed to distribute it in your own locality. Why? Because you made your money in that locality. And everyone who makes money in their own region, they have a primary responsibility of taking care of their own people in their own locality first. This is the way Allah has made it. So first, you got to take care of your family. They have the first responsibility over you, financially. Second responsibility are your closest neighbors. They have more priority over you than people who are far away. And then your general community around you has more priority. And then outside of that, people far away or distant, then everyone in their own region has to take care of everyone in their own region. There's only two exceptions. Exception number one is if you have family members that live abroad somewhere else, and you're saying, I'm going to distribute this zakat or this animal meat to my family members so that they can have meat. Exception number one. What's exception number two? Does anybody know? Hmm? Pilgrimage? No, no, outside of Hajj. Outside of Hajj. Yeah. Emergency situation, right? So if there's an emergency situation somewhere, and the situation is so bad, and they absolutely need that zakah money, or they absolutely need that meat, or whatever it is, then you have a good reason of transferring, your donation somewhere else. So yes, you can do it abroad if there is a need, really a greater need. Now I know some people make this argument and they say, you know what? Americans are a bunch of spoiled people and everybody's rich and they live a nice lifestyle. So we should never, ever give zakah or do udhiyah here because everyone's got so much money. That's actually not true. If you look at the number of homeless people in the United States, including even in the Muslim community, if you work with people who are in need, you'll understand that that's actually not the case. The standard of living is much higher in the United States. So the way in which poverty manifests itself is different, but it doesn't mean that people are not in need, right? So there are great local organizations who go, do your udhiyah for you, your qurbani for you, and they distribute the meat among people who are in need, and these people can oftentimes not afford meat. So they actually are in need as well. So this is number one. Number two, if you're going to go and buy an animal and have it sacrificed abroad in another country, do not be like this person. So you go on one of these websites of one of these relief organizations, and you look and you say, Syria, cost of a goat, $175. You're like, Chechnya, cost of a goat, $220. Bangladesh, cost of a goat, $70. That's a really good deal. I'm going to go with the $70. So don't be that person. What you should do, my advice and my fatwa is, it's not a requirement, but you should look at the price of what you would have paid in America where you should have been sacrificing that animal here. And what the cost would be here, that's the cost that you should be donating for the animals abroad, so that you even up it to like 1.5 animals or whatever it may be. So you're not trying to get yourself a discount by going abroad. So if a sheep in California was $280, and then you go online, you see, you know what? In Gaza, the cost of a sheep to be distributed is $170. You go and you put 220. What I say? I forgot the number. $220, whatever, $270, whatever it was in California. You put that extra money into extra animal or half an animal, whatever it is going to be distributed. So it goes to the people. So you're not trying to get yourself a discount. Next point. Is animal sacrifice ethical? Okay, sacrificing an animal is not an act of cruelty. So there are two extremes that we have today. One extreme is that people abuse animals, and they do. There are many hadiths where the Prophet, peace be upon him, prohibited abusing animals. He was so careful and so cautious about people who would unnecessarily brand animals on their face, use animals for target practice, overload animals, even overloading a camel, and it's very difficult on the camel. It's not supposed to bear this much of a load. He would really criticize people and stop them from doing something like this. So he was definitely someone who cared very much for animals. But now there's a new philosophy that's becoming very prevalent, especially among younger people. And this philosophy is almost based in a religion, and that is that animals are not for us to use. They're not for us to consume. And if you eat an animal, if you sacrifice an animal, if you kill an animal, animals have feelings. Of course they have feelings. But animals have feelings. Animals experience pain. And therefore, if you do anything to an animal, it is an act of cruelty and you're an unethical person. And PETA is a perfect example of an organization that is very radical. People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. It's one of the largest animal rights organizations. And what you find is, if you look at the FBI records, going back to the 1970s, 1980s, and all of that, among the FBI's top terrorist organizations have been radical liberal groups who are animal rights activists. They did not necessarily kill people, but the amount of domestic terrorism that they've engaged in to either protect the forest or to protect animals or something like that is extremely high. You can check their database and everything like that. So there is another extreme, and sometimes this is based in either Buddhist philosophy or it's based in a type of Hindu philosophy. People do yoga, people do meditation, and they start to absorb these other religious philosophies inside themselves, and they say, you know what, we're going 100% vegan. We're not gonna, we're not gonna drink milk. We're not gonna eat eggs. We're not gonna do any of that because all of it is cruelty to animals. Now, factory farming is a problem. There is the way in which things are done. There is a level of unnecessary cruelty to animals due to the massive consumption, that people are engaging in. The problem is there's a difference between advocating for animal respect of animals and a difference between saying that animals were not created by Allah for us to use. They're like human beings and you should not touch them. This is an extreme philosophy, and it's very dangerous for a Muslim to fall into this trap. And there are some Muslims who have actually written against the practice of Udhiyah and Qurbani, saying this is unethical, we should boycott it, all Muslims should stop sacrificing animals, we should ban the practice of sacrificing animals even on the day of Eid. Quite frankly, this is ridiculous, and it's dangerous, and it's a violation of Aqidah. It's a violation of the beliefs and principles of Islam, because this is a part and parcel of Islam. So be cautious and be careful that you don't fall into one of these extreme groups. Okay, now, if you're going to be slaughtering an animal, even if you're not, it's good to know how the animal gets slaughtered. So that's what this program was really supposed to be about. So how do you slaughter an animal? There is a very specific way that Islam has made requirements for slaughtering an animal. Some of these are recommended, some of them are required. Now, why did Allah do this? Because animals are living things. They're not like humans, but they're still living creatures. So there's a certain type of respect that we need to have and some ritual that we need to perform, because Allah gave us this blessing of being able to use animals and being able to actually take their life, even if it's for the purpose of eating their meat, which is, for our own benefit. So first of all, the one who's going to be doing the udhiyah should be a Muslim. Now, outside of that, if you're eating meat, it could be a Jew, it could be a Christian. We won't get into that discussion. But basically, when you go to a farm, you don't just pick any random person and say, oh, I don't like to slaughter the animal myself, so you do it for me. You can't just have some random person do it for you. You have to make sure it's a Muslim, and they're going to be doing, or it could be a Jew or a Christian, but you got to make sure a Muslim is doing this or you're doing it yourself. Number one. Number two, a sharp instrument must be used. And it's recommended, highly recommended, that you sharpen the knife right before you slaughter the animal. Now, why would you sharpen the knife right before you slaughter the animal? Yes. So the animal doesn't suffer longer. So if the knife is sharp, so the more you use a knife, it gets dull. So the more you sharpen it, the faster it's going to cut. The faster it cuts, the less pain the animal's going to feel, and it's going to die faster. So that's very important. If you don't sharpen the knife before, so if you go to a farm and you're going to perform a slaughter, make sure that you're telling the person who's going to be handing you the knife or whatever, ask them to sharpen it again right before you're cut, unless they just sharpened it, because you have to sharpen it every few times after every few animals. So they need to resharpen it so that it's not going to cause as much pain to the animal. Number two. Number three, if possible, you go to a farm, you do not let your animal watch other animals being sacrificed. Because if they're watching, they're going to die before they die, right? They're going to be sitting there watching, this is coming to me. They can sense that. They can understand that. So you don't let them see what's taking place. You keep them away, and then you take them in a corner somewhere, and you're going to sacrifice. Now, if you go to a normal farm, they don't have these protocols. These are Islamic protocols. If you go to a non-Muslim farm, but you're buying an animal, you're going to tell them, these are the protocols that I'm going to follow because I'm a Muslim and this is how we do things in Islam. The next thing is, you must mention the name of Allah when you slaughter the animal by saying Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. Bismillah means in the name of Allah. I'm doing this in the name of Allah. And Allahu Akbar, Allah is the greatest. So this is because the name of Allah will purify this action of sacrifice, because they're living creatures. So Allah made us say, before we sacrifice the animal, we have to say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar before you start cutting. And then there's different ways to cut. People will teach you. You can do a 3-cut or one really deep cut. You have to make sure the cut gets deep down inside so the animal starts bleeding out and it starts dying, and then it stops feeling the pain after that. What if you accidentally forget to mention the name of Allah? What do you do then? This happened to me. First time I was slaughtering an animal, they said, okay, give me the knife. I was like getting nervous. It's my first time. I said, where do I cut? Said, you're going to cut right here. I said, okay, I'm going to do it. I just did it. They said, say Bismillah. I forgot to say Bismillah. I said Bismillah right afterwards. Do I have to do another animal or no? No. So if you forget, it's excused. But if you intentionally skip it, it's not excused and you have to do another animal. Okay? This is out of mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, when you're sacrificing a sheep or a goat, what you're going to do is you have to understand there are 4 parts in the throat of an animal. There are 2 jugular veins, which are called arteries. What do arteries do? The blood flows through them, exactly. And then there is an esophagus or a gullet. What does that do? For food. And then you have the trachea. The trachea is for the air. Okay, so there's 4 parts. There's 2 blood vessels for blood going through. There's 1 for food, and there's 1 for air. Now, when you're going to cut, you're supposed to try to cut all 4 of these, right? At minimum, you have to at least cut the majority of them. Otherwise, your sacrifice is not going to be valid. What is the majority of them? You can't cut a half. So out of 4, how many you have to cut? 3. Minimum, any of these, you have to get 3, right? Because if you get 3, by the way, you at least hit one of them where the blood's going to come out. The key is the blood needs to come out, right? So that's the most important part. So the majority of the 4 need to be cut. Now you're supposed to try to cut all through to get all 4 so that the blood comes out faster and the animal feels less pain. But what you're not supposed to do is cut all the way beyond, all the way down into the spinal cord, because that actually hurts the animal more and it prevents the amount of blood from coming out once you've actually done the slaughter. The goal is to slaughter the animal by doing 2 things. Number 1, you want to cause the least amount of pain to the animal. And number 2, you want to get as much blood out of the animal as possible, because then it's not going to remain in the meat. If it remains in the meat, then it's going to have an effect on the type of quality of meat that you're having, because you got blood in your meat. That's not good. That's the whole purpose of this slaughter. Okay? But when it comes to a camel, or a cow, same thing. When it comes to a camel, or any other animal that has like a long neck, like an ostrich or something like that. You can't do an ostrich for udhiyah, but if you're ever going to eat it, are you allowed to eat ostrich? Has anyone ever eaten ostrich before? No? Try ostrich jerky from South Africa. Amazing. A lot of halal jerky comes, and ostrich is one of those things called biltong. Anyways, it tastes pretty good. So if you're going to sacrifice a camel, which you're probably not, but if you ever did, you do not use a knife, because when you're talking about the other animals, what are you going to do? You're going to lay them down on the floor. You got to take out a knife, and you're going to do that. With the camels are huge. You're not going to lay it down on the floor. It's not a good practice. So instead, when it comes to an animal with a long neck, what you're going to do is you're going to puncture the same 4 parts with 2 ways. What they used to do in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, especially if it was a tall animal, what they would do is they would take a spear and they would stab it in the neck area right there, the upper part of the neck, and it would puncture these parts and it would start bleeding out. The second thing to do is you could actually take a knife if it's a little bit shorter, and you can actually stab the knife. So there's a difference between the three animals. You have a cow, you have a goat, you have a sheep. You're going to take a knife and you're going to be doing the knife, usually like 3 times. You're going to be cutting through. If it's a camel, you're going to be stabbing it in that same region. And someone who's a specialist in camel, they'll tell you exactly where to stab. So you don't stab. You're not supposed to stab him in the arm and he bleeds out and dies. That's not animal sacrifice. You're supposed to stab them in the right spot so the majority of the blood comes out in the jugular vein, and that's the place where most blood is pumping through, where someone's going to be killed. So this ensures the animal actually dies faster, and it ensures that it's actually easier for you to do that. So anyways, that's animal sacrifice. Last thing we'll cover is there are some hadiths which state that if you're going to offer an animal sacrifice, and we mentioned the 2 opinions, one of them is that it's wajib, it's required, and one of them that is sunnah mu'akkada, it's a highly emphasized sunnah and highly recommended that you do it. Whichever opinion you follow, there's some hadith which say if you're going to perform a sacrifice, you should not cut your nails and you should not trim your hair. So there's a hadith like that. And then there are some other hadith which say that the Prophet, peace be upon him, offered a sacrifice and he cut his hair and he cut his nails. The first hadith is in Sahih Muslim. The second hadith, is it authentic or not? Is Sahih Muslim an authentic book? Yes, authentic. The second hadith, where he said the Prophet offered a sacrifice and he cut his hair and he cut his nails, that is in Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari. So you say, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? The Prophet said to not do this, but then he did this himself. What's happening? So because of this, you have 2 authentic reports. This is the summarized version. You have 2 authentic reports. What do? Scholars have taken 3 approaches to figuring out what to do with these 2 hadiths, which seem to explain things in different ways. Why would the Prophet do something that he said not to do? This doesn't make sense. So something's going on. So there's 3 opinions on how to deal with these hadith, and they're in the exact same book. They're both in Sahih Muslim, and one of them is in Sahih Bukhari as well. So opinion number 1 is that we combine both of these reports together, and we say that the Prophet was only talking about someone who is going to do a sacrifice, right? And anyone who's not doing a sacrifice, he meant the other one about not refraining from. So if you're doing a sacrifice, you shouldn't cut your nails or your hair. But if you're not doing a sacrifice, then it's allowed for you to do that, and that's probably what the other report meant. It's opinion number 1. Opinion number 2 is that we can reconcile this by saying the first hadith in Sahih Muslim where he said not to do it, it wasn't a requirement. It was a slight recommendation, and the Prophet decided not to follow that recommendation in his own life that year, and that's why he did a sacrifice, but he went ahead and cut his hair and he cut his nails. So therefore it reduces the command from being a command to just like a recommendation. This is opinion number 2. So the opinion number 1 is the Hanbali school of thought, where they say it's a requirement to refrain from this if you're offering a sacrifice. Opinion number 2 is the Shafi'i school of thought, for the most part, which says that it is a recommendation for you to refrain from doing these 2 things in order to resemble kind of like what people at Hajj are doing. You know, they're not going to be cutting their nails when they're in ihram. They're not going to be cutting their hair when they're in ihram. Opinion number 3 is that the hadith of Aisha, where she said the Prophet cut his hair and cut his nails even though he sacrificed an animal, and he had sent it to Mecca as well. The opinion number 3 is that this hadith is in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, and therefore it's more authentic than the hadith that's only in Sahih Muslim. So if you compare the authenticity of the report, this one is way more authentic, number 1. Number 2, if you look at the narrator of the hadith, it's Aisha. And if you look at the narrator of the other hadith, the other companions. Aisha is considered to be faqihah. She is more knowledgeable than the other Sahaba, who are just sometimes narrators of hadith. Therefore, we give her report precedence over the other report, and we dismiss the other report. And this is the opinion of most Malikis and some of the Hanafi scholars, and is attributed to Imam Abu Hanifa himself, which basically says, in a nutshell, that even if you're offering a sacrifice, or if you're not offering a sacrifice, there is nothing wrong with you trimming your nails or trimming your hair. And the additional evidence that they have is they say this is khilaf al-qiyas, which basically means that they say something is not right with this first report, which says you're not allowed to cut. Why? Because if you were not allowed to cut your nails and cut your hair, you should also not be allowed to wear perfume. Because when you're in ihram, you're not allowed to wear perfume either. So why was that not included, but only these two were included? So something doesn't seem right about that report, and it goes against the qiyas of the analogy of having the purpose behind this fulfilled, and therefore we don't accept that report, and we say it's perfectly fine for you to cut your hair and your nails. All of these three opinions have been held by respectable scholars. I personally lean towards the last opinion. All of these have been held by scholars. All of these opinions have been held by Sahaba, among the companions. So you're not going to solve this issue and be like, you know what you shouldn't do. Pick the opinion that the people you trust, or you believe this opinion is stronger. You've understood what I've said. If I've lost you, you don't even know what I'm saying. But if you've understood a little bit of what I said, and you read a little bit more about it, then you say, that opinion makes more sense to me, I think it's stronger. You follow that opinion. What you should not do, especially in the days of Dhul Hijjah, where you're supposed to do more good deeds and you're supposed to refrain from doing bad deeds, is start arguing with other people. Say, you know what? No, you're not following the hadith. No, you are not doing this. No, you need to do this. This is haram for you to do this, and you must do this. And don't argue with other people. There is a valid difference of opinion among the four madhabs. 3 opinions within 4 madhabs, and these opinions are not going away, and they've been there since the time of the Sahaba. And they're all based on authentic hadith. Understand this, please, before you forward me a WhatsApp message with one of the hadith, whichever one you picked, and you say, this is what you got to do, or this is what you shouldn't do. Because every single year, I keep getting people, this is what you got to do based on this hadith. I can be like, well, based on this hadith, this is what you can do as well. And then you go, people just can't process that. They can't reconcile the idea. They can't possibly be 2 hadiths in the same authentic hadith book that have 2 different stories. How do you reconcile that? I just told you how scholars have reconciled. Different ways to reconcile it. Don't make a big issue out of it. And with that, I will open it up for questions, inshallah. I think we have time for only one question. Yeah. So the people who say that there's a prohibition, which is only the Hanbali school, they say it is the first 10 days until the time of Eid. I'll rephrase one more time. The Shafi'i school said it's recommended to not do it, and the Maliki and Hanafi, or half the Hanafi school, they said there's no virtue in doing this at all. Okay, so these are the 3 opinions. We got a break for adhan, inshallah, and if you want, you can ask me questions afterwards. I'll stick around, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum. Yesterday I finished early. Today I was taking my time.